Thanks for being here this morning. I appreciate it. I know that you could be doing a lot of other things, and the fact that you chose to carve out some time to physically be here is awesome. And as a church, I just want you to know that we appreciate that so much. I also want to welcome those of you who are watching online who aren't with us in person. I wish you could be. This is better than watching online, but at the very least, I'm glad you're watching that video and staying connected, and I hope that you experience God's presence there and that you want to grow in your relationship with God as a result of watching this video. So thanks for tuning in. We are in the middle of a series called Essentials, and this series is really all about the essential things that we need in order to continue growing in our relationship with God. So we are not talking about in this series how to be made right with God. None of these things affect our salvation or whether we go to heaven or not when we die. That's not it at all. That's totally Jesus. These are simply things that we can do to make sure that our relationship with God is growing and progressing. We're experiencing more of Him, that we're getting closer to God. Because here's the thing. Our lives are so busy, so hectic. We have so many things that we can do with our time and so many things that even we can do to grow in our relationship with God. There's no shortage of books and podcasts and videos and things that we can do. But what we're talking about in this series are the non-negotiables. If life turns out different, if culture changes, if COVID closures come back, whatever things might change around us, we really believe that these are the essentials from God's perspective. When we look at the Bible and the New Testament letters and what God has to say for us, really these four things in this series are the things that are essential to us growing in our relationship with God and never letting that fall to the side. So, if it's your first time here, first time in a while, first time watching online, we've already covered 2 weeks so far. I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to watch those messages online. Again, because these are not just good ideas, these are not things we should try and add on top of everything else we're doing. These are essential and we ought to not miss them. Now, how many of you have ever seen the TV show Alone? Anybody seen that show? Okay, a few people. Alone is a show on the History Channel, has nothing to do with history, it should be on some other station, but Alone is a show. Here's the premise if you've never seen it. They send out a group of 10 contestants out into the wilderness somewhere in the world, usually it's like northern Canada or something, pretty harsh environments, to see how long they can survive alone. And there's no camera crew, it's not like Survivor or something like that. There's no medical team, 20 feet away off the frame of the camera. These people are completely and totally alone. And they're not even in a group together. It's not like 10 people get dropped off somewhere. They are separated by miles and water and mountain passes. Zero human interaction that these people have while they're on the show, and they film their own journeys. They've got this whole case with batteries and stuff and cameras so they can document their experience being alone. And the goal of the show, like any good reality show, is to see who can last the longest, right? Who can survive the longest being alone? And there's, a $500,000 prize. I think it was $1 million one season. And here's the thing. There's 10 contestants there, and usually in the first couple days or the first week or so, kind of all the wussies and the babies get, they tap out. Like they're living under a canvas tarp, and, there's a bear outside my tarp. Oh, let me get out, Okay, that'd be me. But anyway, what happens, I am not an outdoors guy. What happens as the show progresses, and every season that I've watched so far is usually by about day 30, day 40, day 50, it's a long time to be totally alone. There's usually 3, 4, 5 people who are left and kind of battling it out. And again, they're alone, so they don't know how many people are left. You're just it's a game against your own mind as much as it's a game to survive. You don't know how much longer you got to go. You don't know if it's just you and one other guy or you and 4 other people, whatever it is. And what I've noticed in this show is those people, they've already got the shelter they need. They've got water. They've got a food source or trap lines or something. But what happens, what causes people to tap out, they have a satellite phone that'll bring in a team, a couple hours away. What causes people to tap out is that they start missing somebody. They start thinking about their family or their friends or what they could be doing somewhere else with other people. And it's not a lack of food. It's not a lack of water. It's not a lack of shelter. It's a lack of relationships that causes more people to tap out in this show than anything else. In fact, one guy was on there the longest. They had this challenge. Who can make it 100 days in the wild? Nobody had ever done that before. And the guy who won that show, he made it 100 days, but he was set up for success. He'd basically been a loner his whole life. Anyway, he left his parents when he was a teenager, moved out into the Alaskan bush, and had very limited interaction with everybody, with other people his whole life anyway. But even him, okay, his whole life he'd been almost alone. Even him, as he's filming himself in his little rock cave, snow everywhere, minus 30 degrees, he's looking at a picture of his mom. And he's reminiscing to his parents and how much he wishes he could talk to them and how much he'd like to say thank you and the time that he missed by moving away too early. And what this show has proven, at least to me more than anything else, is that yes, water is essential for humans. Yes, food is essential for humans. Yes, shelter is essential for humans. But this is also essential for human beings. We need relationships. And it's not just a TV show that proves this. Okay, science does as well. There's a psychology professor from Pepperdine University. He says this: of all the experiences we need to survive and thrive, whether you're in the Alaskan bush or you're here in North Branch, it is the experience of relating to others that is the most meaningful and most important. Relationships for you and I as human beings are absolutely essential. Some researchers at the University of Minnesota did a review of 148 different studies, okay? They didn't just make up their own. We can make up our own studies to come to whatever conclusions we want, right? There's enough stuff out there. But researchers at the University of Minnesota did a review of 148 different studies from different people, different methods, different goals. And what they discovered is that people with strong social relationships are 50% less likely to die prematurely than people without strong social relationships. That's incredible. Relationships literally is a life and death issue for us as human beings. And there's so much, I could read so many studies and put so many quotes up there, and we could just have an information session. But I think we all know this, right? We know how important relationships are. COVID quarantine proved that to us, how much we all struggled when we were forced to stay inside our homes, and depression and anxiety was on the rise, and kids not being able to go to school has done so much to harm them in the long term. And I know that we're all different, right? Some of us are extroverts, and some of us are introverts, and some of us have dozens of friends, and some of us have only 2 or 3. But the truth of the matter is, relationships are essential for us as human beings. We are not made to be alone. We are not made to survive alone. We cannot thrive alone. We need each other. And as much as that's true in our, kind of tangible living out our lives in 2021, the same principle is true when it comes to our relationship with God. That we need relationships with others to help our relationship with God. This has been going on since the very beginning. Luke writes in Acts chapter 2, kind of the beginning of the church and first century Christians, some of the first believers. He writes this about them. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, or what we call communion, and to prayer. And right here in this one verse, we see 3 of the 4 essentials already. There's teaching. That's what we talked about week 1. There's prayer or experiencing God ourselves. That was last week. And then fellowship and sharing in meals. That when these first century Christians, when these first people who put their trust in Jesus, when they began a relationship with God, they didn't just do that and then go live off on their own all by themselves. They didn't just put their trust in Jesus and then live totally separate lives disconnected from each other. From the very beginning, community has been essential for Christianity. That these believers, they shared their lives together. As you read throughout the book of Acts, again, kind of documenting how the church got started and how Christianity spread outside of Jerusalem, we see so often that believers met together, prayed together, talked together, encouraged one another, worshiped together. This Christian thing was very much a community relationship between other people. The Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the letters in the New Testament, in his letters, he often writes about his friends, missing his friends, wanting to see his friends, tell my friends I said hi, it's great to hear from my friends. In fact, in 2 Corinthians, he writes one of the most interesting things. I think it's interesting, we'll see if you do or not. He says, when I came to the city of Troas to preach the good news of Christ, the Lord opened a door of opportunity for me. God opened up this great place where I could accomplish the mission, I could reach people for Jesus, I could make a difference in eternity. But I had no peace of mind. Why? because my dear brother Titus hadn't yet arrived with a report from you. So rather than do ministry, rather than walk through this door of opportunity that the Lord had for me, I said goodbye and went on to Macedonia to find him. I mean, can you believe that? If you've been around church for a while, you know the Apostle Paul is kind of one of those, he's pretty good in the faith. You know, he's kind of like a hero, a giant in the faith. You would think that if anybody can make it in their relationship with God alone, it would have been Paul, right? I mean, he had this experience with God, caught up in the third heavens, called to be an apostle to the Gentiles, and yet he says, God, I know you're doing this, but I miss my friends, and so I'm going to leave here and go say hi to my friend. Like, that's crazy. Relationships are so essential for us. All throughout the New Testament, there's over 100 different references to the term one another or each other, that we are to forgive one another, we're to help each other, we're to take care of each other, we're to encourage one another, all these different things. In fact, probably the most influential or biggest or strongest case that the authors of the New Testament have to say about how essential relationships are is what they don't write. There are almost 8,000 verses in the New Testament, and you cannot find one that encourages Christians to go it alone. Not one. There's not even a hint, an instruction, a command, an encouragement that says, your faith is just between you and God, and you just keep it to yourself. Like, that ain't there. It is completely absent from the New Testament. And I don't know where this came from in our culture. I don't know who started it. I'd love to find them and shake them a little bit, but there's this idea that we've bought into that, well, it's just between me and God, and that's just how it's going to stay. You know, we've been told, don't talk about politics and don't talk about religion with anybody, right? And so my relationship with God is just between me and God, and I don't need to talk to you about it, and you don't talk to me about it, and we don't need each other. It's just, my faith is just a private matter, right? That's a lie. That is a lie from the pit of hell itself. Christianity is not a solo sport. Christianity is not meant to be lived in isolation. We need each other. One of the ways that our faith is formed best is through friendships. It's through relationships with other Christians. It's with the help of other people who are heading the same direction spiritually that we want to head in our own lives. And the reason for this, the reason that relationships are so essential, is basically the exact same reason that good teaching is so essential. If you were here for the first week of this series, we talked about good teaching. And why? Because it prevents us from going the wrong way and encourages us to go the right way. It's protection and direction. And the same thing is true in relationships. Relationships with other Christians, if we want to grow in our relationship with God, relationships with others offers protection and direction. There's a danger for all of us, whether you have been a Christian your whole life, whether you've been coming to church a lot or a little, whether you're even just kind of skeptical and discovering, there's a danger that we all need to be aware of, and that is the tendency to drift. None of us are exempt from it. Every single one of us can so easily drift in our relationship with God. And I would assume that's not a goal for any of us. Now, I don't know exactly where you're at, but the fact that you're here watching this video would tell me you probably don't have that goal in your life, unless someone is offering to buy you Taco Bell after service and you're just here to appease them, okay? So most of us probably would say, I want to grow closer to God. I want to experience more of His presence. I want to trust God more, right? If you were here for the last 2 weeks of this series, you might even have told yourself, okay, you know what? I'm going to commit to getting good teaching in my life. Okay, I'm going to commit to experiencing God's presence in my life. God, I promise you I'm going to do these things. And we can make good commitments, and we can make promises, and we can have good intentions. But how'd your last diet go? How'd your last New Year's resolution go? The odds are against us. We can make good promises, and we can have good intentions. But most of the time, I want to say 99% of the time, we're just not strong enough to do that on our own. Our commitments and our promises and our intentions are not enough. We can so easily drift, and that's why relationships with others are so important. The author of Hebrews writes about this several times in his letter. He says this in one of them, be careful then, okay? So let's pay attention to this right here. This is not something we should skip by. We ought to highlight, circle, underline this. When we read this, be careful then, dear brothers and sisters, you and I, be careful. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. Okay, I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that my heart's not evil. I want to make sure that I don't turn away from God. How? You must warn each other. That relationship piece. Warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God, so that none of you will unintentionally, subconsciously drift away from God and lose your relationship with Him. Be careful, be careful. Warn each other. We can't do this faith thing alone. We need other people to help protect us from drifting. We need relationships with each other who can call us out when they see issues, who can correct us when we're heading the wrong way. And listen, that's hard. That is hard. We are trained in this culture that when we receive correction, when somebody tries to tell us maybe a hard truth, man, we just want to run the other way. That's uncomfortable. I don't like it. I'm going to cut you off. You're wrong. I'm right. And I'm just going to surround myself with an echo chamber of people who are always going to tell me I'm right. But this is why relationships are so important in our relationship with God, so that we can warn each other, so that we can protect ourselves from drifting away from God. He finishes up the thought by saying this: for if we are faithful to the end, trusting God just as firmly as when we first believed, we will share in all that belongs to Christ. Then our relationship with God will grow. If we've got people, if we're careful, if we warn each other, if we take care of each other, if we protect each other, then our relationship with God can grow and thrive, and we will be better off because of it. He writes something similar a few chapters later in chapter 12. He says, look after each other. There's the relationship piece again, so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. Again, it's the relationship piece is how we look out. It's how we watch out, is through relationships with other Christians. Because sometimes we just got blind spots. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes we're drifting and we don't even know. And having people there to protect us helps us stay connected and growing in our relationship with God. Because if we don't have this relationship piece, if we don't work at building intentional relationships with other people who are growing in their relationship with God, that's going to hurt us in the long run. The potential and the danger to drift, to start doing wrong things, believing wrong things. I mean, there's so much potential to get weird and off and disconnected from God, and it's just not good. I want to tell you an example of what this looks like in life, but I want you to really pay attention, okay? Because you can so easily get offended if you don't hear what I'm going to say. So listen to me, listen to what I'm not saying as well. We've all noticed something in life. We've all noticed that you can tell a kid or a person who grew up as an only child, right? Now, I'm not saying all only children end up this, but we've all experienced people who grew up and didn't have a lot of other social interaction with kids their age. They didn't grow up with brothers and sisters. We can just tell something. Or, this is the one that'll really get offensive, so that's not my heart, that's not what I mean. But we can tell kids who were homeschooled in isolation. Not that homeschooling is bad, okay? Homeschooling is a great option. If it works for you, it's awesome. That is fantastic. And I know that a lot of parents who homeschool work very hard to have interaction and to be a part of clubs and churches and things like that. But we've all been able to tell the kids who were homeschooled in isolation, who didn't have relationships with other kids, who didn't learn how to manage their emotions, who didn't learn how to share things, who didn't learn how to deal with when things don't go your way. Why can we tell that about people? Because social isolation is just not good for us. Every single one of us will be harmed and hurt by being socially isolated. And the same thing is true in our relationship with God. I've read the Bible, I've looked through it quite a bit. I have not read one story of a person who stayed a Christian all alone. It's just not there. And then on top of that, my own personal experience, I've been a follower of Christ for about 20 years now. I have not met somebody who was a Christian and stayed a Christian all on their own. It just doesn't happen. You look at somebody and what I've seen happen time and time again, more times than I'd like to admit, somebody puts their trust in Jesus and they're engaged, they love God, they love church, they love all these different things and they're super there. But then life starts to get busy, right? Busy with, going to the cabin or kids' sports or hunting. busy with a whole lot of certain things. And when they leave relationships, whether that's leave a church, leave a small group, leave something, when they leave a relationship, you can look down the line 5 years later, and I wonder if they're even connected to God anymore. Now, I'm not trying to judge their heart. By all outward appearances, it doesn't seem that way. And I think we fall into this idea or the belief that, well, but I can experience God by myself in the woods. I can experience God by myself on the lake. Yeah, that's technically true. But do we? Just because we can doesn't mean that we do. When you're out in the stand, when you're up at the cabin, when you're out on the lake, when you're doing whatever, are we taking time to talk to God and to experience His presence? Are we asking Him to fill us with His love and His perspective? Are we asking Him to help us be more effective in the mission? Are we asking Him to give us an eternal perspective on this world? Or are we just enjoying nature? We think we're experiencing God, but really we're just experiencing the lake. Let's not fool ourselves. That's where the value of relationships comes, that we can protect each other, that we can hold each other accountable so that we don't drift away from God. One of the reasons that relationships are so essential for us is because of the protection they provide. The protection is in the people that we surround ourselves with. But it's not the only reason. Just like with teaching, having relationships with other believers, with other Christians, with other people trying to grow close to God, also helps us move the right way or continue down that path. Again, the author of Hebrews got a lot to say about this. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm. Let us not give up on our relationship with God. Let us stay connected to Him. Why? For God can be trusted to keep His promise. And so in view of that, let's think of ways to motivate one another. There's the relationship piece, to acts of love and to good works and to living out our faith and living out our relationship with God. And let us not neglect our meeting together. There's the relationship piece again, as some people do, has become so common in our culture today. But encourage, in case we didn't get it the first 2 times, maybe the third time's a charm, one another, especially now that the day of His return is drawing near. Good teaching on its own is not enough. Even experiencing God's presence for ourselves is not enough. We need each other. We need one another. Why? Because we all need motivation. Why? Because we all need encouragement. So don't stop meeting together. Don't stop being together. Be intentional about building relationships with people who will push us in the right direction. Paul writes this to the Thessalonian church. He says, Christ died for us so that whether we are dead or alive when He returns, we can live with Him forever. And because of that, encourage each other and build each other up, just as you are already doing. And again here, we got 3 of the essentials. Christ died, that's the teaching, so that we can experience God, so that we can live with Him forever. That's the experience part. And now, encourage each other, build each other up. We need each other. Relationships with other Christians is so essential, and we have totally ignored or bypassed or downplayed how essential it is for us in our relationship with God. I think of it like riding a tandem bicycle, okay? Pretty dorky thing to do. Sorry if you ride one. I'm not going to ride a tandem bicycle ever in my life. But try and get that picture in your head, right? That when you want to take your foot off the pedals or when you just want to coast, there's somebody else pushing you forward, right? It's the same thing spiritually. When you and I are tempted to skip services, not be around church very often, having other relationships in our lives, people who can maybe call us and challenge us, say, I'd love to see you there, how's life going, haven't seen you in a while. They can be there to help pedal us along, even if we feel tempted to stop pedaling. When we are feeling angry, maybe someone or something, they can be there to remind us, hey, you know what? Why don't you just ponder a little bit God's forgiveness for you? And maybe after you experience some of that, maybe you'll be more likely to forgive somebody who you're angry at. When we feel like God's not listening, somebody there can pedal right along with us. No, He does. He does. Keep talking to God. Don't give up on Him. He loves you. When we're starting to invest too much time or money or something into earthly, temporary things, they can be there and say, hey, is that gonna make a difference in eternity? How are you using your resources to benefit and reach. I mean, so many different benefits that we have. Part of the reason, relationships are so essential for us from God's perspective, but even more than that, they're so beneficial for us in our relationship with God. Why would we not want to build these into our lives for our own benefit? And so here's a question for you, okay? Just think about this. You don't have to answer out loud. Do you have relationships with other Christians that can protect and direct you in your relationship with God? Do you have real relationships with other Christians who can protect and direct you? And I would suggest outside of your family. Family is great. Hopefully you've got it in your family too, but sometimes some of the struggles we face are in our family. So who are you going to talk to then? Outside of that. And not online. Not on Facebook doesn't count. Watching online is great, but that doesn't count. Zoom calls are cool, but that doesn't count. I think of Facebook and social media as like the oatmeal raisin cookies of relationships, okay? Let me explain. You see a plate of oatmeal raisin cookies and you think, oh, these are going to be the greatest chocolate chip cookies ever. These look awesome, right? And then you pick one up and taste it and discover this is a disgusting lie. Gross. Don't ever give me oatmeal raisin cookies. They're nasty, okay? It's the same thing with like Facebook and liking and commenting and having a Zoom call and all these things. Like, they're just enough. It's an illusion of relationships, just enough to fool us into preventing us from having real relationships with people. Again, we all remember COVID and how difficult that was. You can't have a real relationship through a camera. You just can't. It's a great add-on, it's a great tool, it's a great thing to add to relationships, but it doesn't replace. And for all the benefits of social media and technology and internet, I actually think they've done more harm to our ability to have relationships with each other because we've been fooled by online. Do you have relationships with other Christians where you know their name, where you know their story, where you know their background, where you know what they're struggling with, where you know where they're at in their relationship with God, and where they know that same stuff about you? Do you have connections with other people that they can call you out on your crap and you can call them out on your crap and we can be honest and vulnerable with each other? Do we have relationships, essential relationships, like what God encourages us to do through the Bible? I told you the first week of this series that we're going to be very direct and blunt with the application piece each week. I'm going to continue that. The information is relationships are essential, but the application, at least at this church, we get those relationships. We build those relationships through small groups. That's just it. I don't know of a better way to do it. Maybe the strategy will change in a few years. Who knows? If you got another idea, let me know. But right now at this church, the best way to build intentional relationships with other Christians for our own protection and direction and relationship with God comes through small groups. And I want you to know that I am about to launch into a sales pitch for small groups, okay? So we're all on the same page. I'm not trying to pull a fast one over you. This is not some like used car salesman slick trick. I'm letting you know what the goal is. But the reason I feel so comfortable doing that, the reason I don't feel like a sleazy kind of guy, is because I know, this is not pastor, this is not staff, church staff, this is just regular old everyday me. I know how valuable small groups have been to me. When I look at my own life and my own relationship with God, there is nothing that even comes close to being as beneficial as small groups. Not watching messages, not going to Bible school, not even my own personal experience with God. It has been being involved with other Christians in small groups that has done the most for me. Because it's by being in small groups that I learned how to pray. I learned how to talk to God. I learned how to be open and honest with Him. How? By listening to other people pray. By listening to how other people communicate with God and the words they chose and the passions that came out and sometimes the vulnerability they shared really opened up the door for me to understand that prayer is just being as open and honest in communication with God that we pause. My life has changed so much, and my ability to communicate with God has been greatly, more than anything else, improved through being in small groups. I have learned more about God's character and how to understand the Bible through small groups more than any other class or video or teaching, anything like that. Those are all important. Those are great additional things. But it's been in small groups where we've read the scriptures together, where we've talked about it, where we've discussed things from different perspectives and opinions and life experiences, and where we've wrestled with questions on what does this mean and how do we live it out and what works for you and what, like, it's been in those times where I have grown the most in my understanding. It comes through small groups. It's through these relationships, and sometimes they can be tough and not always easy, that the Holy Spirit has developed fruit in my life. It's been through small groups that I've experienced God's supernatural comfort in trying times. That there have been times where I've called somebody at 2 a.m. for prayer, and they've called me, and I've shared struggles about marriage and parenting, and shared my low points when I feel like quitting and giving up, and this ministry thing isn't worth it, and it was through these other people in small groups that God worked in me. It wasn't just me and God alone just sitting in a room. It was through my relationships with other people. And I know that small groups has been the tool that God has used to grow and develop me the most. Still got a long ways to go. That's why I'm still in small groups today, because they're that beneficial. And listen, in a church our size, we're no mega church by any stretch of the imagination, right? But in a church our size with multiple services, couple hundred people, there's no way for us to have the level of relationships that we need at a service like this. But in a small group, 8 to 12, 15 people, we can. There's no way that you and I can get to know each other's stories and our names and our backgrounds and our struggles and all those different things just sitting next to somebody for 60 minutes or saying hi in the lobby. Cool things, great things we should do, but we don't get to the level of essential relationships that we need at a service like this. That's where small groups come into play. 8, 10, 12 people where we can know each other. And listen, we believe so much in small groups. Okay, here's the start of my sales pitch. Everybody still hanging? This is the beginning of it. We believe in small groups so much that we have done everything we can possibly think of to make it as easy and pain-free and worry-free and anxiety-free as we possibly can. All of our small groups are starting new studies in October, which means that you're not going to walk into a group that's been studying, Genesis for 7 years and you have no idea what's like. That's not the case. We're all starting fresh. Every group is supposed to end in January so that you're not stuck for life. Maybe the people just aren't right. You're not jiving, whatever. They start in October, they end in January. It's a clean start, clean end. That's cool. At a small group here, at least, nobody is forced to, answer a question they don't know, or forced to read out of the Bible, and I don't know how to pray these names. I don't even know where to find 2 Corinthians, Nobody is forced to pray out, none of those things. And if you have a different experience at a small group, let me know, because I'm going to kick those facilitators in the butt, okay? So just that's not going to happen here. All of our facilitators have been trained to know how to interact with people and how to provide a comfortable environment and how to lead people to discover God's truth for their lives. They are great people who want to help you grow in your relationship with God. We've got a whole website dedicated to our groups where you can find groups based on the day of the week, and whether it's men's groups, women's groups, couples groups, if they offer a meal, if they offer childcare, if they meet in Cambridge or North Branch or at the church or wherever it is. We have tried our very best to make it as easy for you to get involved in a group as possible. Why? For us? No. It's not for us. It's not so we can look really good on some number sheet somewhere. It's for you. Because we know and believe in the power of relationships and how essential they are. And we want to do everything we can to help you find and foster those sorts of relationships for your own good, for your own benefit, for your own relationship with God. And listen, being involved in a small group, being intentional about building relationships is going to be inconvenient, okay? It's just going to be. You're going to have to say no to something else. It might be awkward to start with. Anytime we start new relationships, kind of I don't know what to talk about. Let's talk about the weather. Okay, so it might be a little awkward at first. But I promise you, relationships are so essential. And if you stick it out, God will work through the people in your lives to grow your own relationship with Him. This is just as essential as good teaching and experiencing God for ourselves. And I hope and pray that every single one of us would want to grow in our relationship with God. And I hope that God would inspire us and challenge us and motivate us to build relationships, to be intentional about getting people around us who are heading the same direction spiritually that we want to head. So before we leave, let's take a couple minutes, let's enjoy God's presence together, and let's talk to Him and ask Him to help us, okay? Let's pray. Father, thank you for giving us the Bible. Thank you that people thousands of years ago wrote down your inspired word and instructions and help for us so that we don't have to try and figure this stuff out on our own. Thank you, God, for your instruction, your care, your concern for our lives. Thank you for putting it down on paper that we can read today. And Father, I pray that you would stir us up or challenge, reveal to our hearts, God, the importance of having other believers, other Christians' relationships in our life. Father, you've been so clear in your word about the value of it, but Father, it needs to be more than information in our minds. We are asking you to bring that information to our hearts, God. As we spend time with you, as we experience you, may you illuminate to us the value of having other people in our lives to help us in our relationship with you. And then, Father, after that, we just ask for courage to actually take a step. It's one thing to know information. It's another thing to actually take the step of application. And God, I just ask for me, for all of us, give us courage to start these new relationships, to keep building relationships with others. And Father, I pray that you will work in our lives in incredible ways. May we know you better. May we know you more. May we experience more of your presence because of the other people around us helping to protect and direct us. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.